Hi everyone, and welcome back to Flexpo. In this session, we're talking about, well, this is a definitive guide to asking for flexible working, even if you haven't got the job yet. And I think, it's fair to say that things have changed enormously over the course of the pandemic. And a lot more companies are now open to having a conversation in the recruitment process about flexible working, which perhaps wasn't as possible or as widely available as it may have been last year. And of all the debates around flexible working, I think this one gets the most airtime because people want to know, when should you ask for flexible working and how should you go about it? So today, I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Karen Mattison, the co-founder of Timewis, Gyimah, founder of Equality Pays, and Katy, Fridman, founder of Flexible Working People. At this point, I'm going to hand over to our brilliant speakers to introduce themselves. So Karen, you appear first on my screen. I'm going to come to you first to introduce yourself, and thanks so much for being here with us today.
Morning, afternoon. I'm Karen Mattison and I am one of the co-founders of Timewis, and we're a specialist business focusing on flexible working. We have a consultancy where we advise businesses on how to make flexible working a commercial success for them. And we also have a job site with 90,000 candidates on it, specialising in flexible and part-time opportunities and some advice and support for candidates who want a flexible role.
Amazing organisation. Thanks, Karen. Michelle, I'm going to come to you next. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Gyimah and I am the director of a pay gaps consultancy called Equality Pays. So I work with organisations to help them understand why they have gender and ethnicity pay gaps. And I also coach women to improve their negotiation skills, because I think that is so important for them to be able to self-advocate for more of what they want, to be able to stay in work in the way that really works for them.
Thanks so much for being here, Michelle. And Katy, lovely to see you.
Thank you for having me. So I'm Katy Fridman. I set up a Facebook group 2.5 years ago, which is now called Flexible Working People. And I champion the idea that people should be able to have careers that they love on terms that work for them. And I've built a community around supporting people to get careers on flexible terms. And now I've set up a jobs board and a website, Flexible Working People, where I connect businesses to all of the brilliant talent that sits in my community.
Thanks so much, Katy. It's lovely to see you. And thank you to you all for being here for this really important conversation, which I think is going to be an exceptional one. So kick off then with the most important question on everybody's lip. When should you ask for flexible working? At what point should you ask? And I know that we've got some different views in the panel today, so I'm really looking forward to exploring those. Karen, I'd love to come to you first on this. What do you think?
Well, this is the big question, I think, and if I speak to any kind of candidate audience, it's usually the question that comes up first. At what point, in an ideal world, we would have, at the point of advertising a role, we would have an indication from the employer around what openness they've got to flexibility, whether it's part-time, working from home, whatever it might be, as in the same way that we would on salary or location. But unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world. And at the moment, the Timewis Flexible Jobs Index shows that only 15% of vacancies make any mention of flexible working. But we know that many more employers than that are open to flexibility. They're just not saying it. So then you get the debate for the individual. So ideally, this wouldn't be on the individual candidate to have to work it out for themselves. But the reality is that they do. And we do, and we've all been in that situation ourselves. And I do see it really as more of an art than a science. I can't give a firm view that will always work, but based on our experience at Timewis, my personal experience, I see it as a little bit of a kind of game of poker, a kind of flexibility poker. So at which point in the journey to getting the job should you show your hand to the employer? And in our view, and my view, if you show it too soon, before the employer has effectively fallen in love with you, it's probably a mistake. So if you go into your first interview on the way from the lift, as you sit down and you say, hang on a sec, before we even get started, you didn't mention flexibility in this role, but I really need to work 4 days, or I need 3 days, or I need to work from home, is that okay? I think it's too soon, because your negotiation power is much weaker, because you're not the candidate that they're really interested in talking to. So as I said, some people feel very uncomfortable about this because they feel like they're hiding something or they're being not transparent. But I would say that while you're put in a situation where you don't know what openness the organisation has to flexible working, this is probably the best way to do it. So my personal view is wait until you're much more close to the job offer itself, and then you sit down and have a conversation. So that answers the when. It doesn't answer the how, which I know we'll come on to later. But for me, the when is a little bit further down and closer to job offer.
Thanks for such a thorough answer there, Karen. That's really, really useful. Michelle, I'd like to come to you next on this. What's your view?
Yeah, well, you know, like Karen said, it really is an art rather than a science, and it is the question that I see that comes up time and time again. And you know, you would see various answers across the spectrum. With some people are really diehard, like you don't reveal until you've got the job, and other people saying, well, I should be able to say right from the start. Now, my personal view has always been that you don't say anything until they have fallen in love with you, until you know that there is an offer on the table for you. Having said that, with everything that's going on with COVID at the moment and the way in which we're seeing employers almost forced to rethink their attitudes towards flexible working, I feel like this is an opportunity for a shift happening, in the sense that employers will realize that it's not okay not to be upfront about how supportive they are around flexible working. So my hope is that we can move to a place where it's a conversation that you can have much sooner, either because they've been explicitly said, we are open to conversations around flexible working, or that you will feel more confident about being able to say, well, these are the things that I may need to make this job work. Can we have a conversation? And I think the reason why the question comes up is because there's a lot of fear around backlash. There's the fear of the job being taken away. There's the fear of being viewed as not committed to your role. So I guess, you know, it's about wanting to move to a place where, you know, as candidates, we're not in a place where we're fearful around having that conversation. You want to move to a place of, well, this is just part of the process, and it's just, you know, another aspect of, you know, going for a job. So my advice still is to kind of use your intuition as to when you think it's okay to bring this conversation up, still leaning towards doing it from a place of strength. So you are getting good signals that you are, you know, really being considered or being told that the job is yours. But again, you know, we're all grown-ups, we can use our intuition as to when we think it's a good time to bring it up. But yeah, trying to do it from a place of strength until we can see that the conversation around flexible working at recruitment stage is much more normalized.
It's so difficult, isn't it? I think because you can be really split between that fear and the, you know, the worry that will negatively impact your chances of securing the role. But at the same time, so many of us feel so strongly about how right this is and how much of an impact it can make both for a business and on us personally. So you're sort of caught between the activist in you and the person who just really wants the job. So it's kind of that ever evolving conflict, isn't it? Thanks for your perspectives. I could talk to you all about this all day. Katy, I'm going to come to you on this next. What do you think about when someone should ask for flexible working? When's the
So I think Karen and Michelle and I all agree on this point. But so I would say the rule of thumb is get yourself in front of the employer first, dazzle them, get them to love you, and use flexibility as part of the negotiation, like you would anything else. Because if you go in straight up front and say, well, this is what I want, and they don't know who they are, and they don't even know that they want you, like you, that you could do the job, or you're good for the organisation, you're on the back foot. But I do say to people, and I have seen examples and personal ones too, where it does depend, and you do have to know your audience. And that's back to Michelle's point of using your intuition. So I think that there is a case, throw this out there, of times where you can upfront say, this is what I'm looking for. If that is what you're looking for, and it is a non-negotiable, and we'll get onto this later because we're going to talk about negotiation. But if it is a non-negotiable that you only want to work 3 days a week, and you have the confidence to say up front, look, I've been doing this for many years. Sometimes it works better if you're a little bit more senior, and you can say, I'm actually only looking for something that does this, but being prepared that that might not meet with the expectations of the employer, and that you are prepared to walk away at that point. So I'm caveating this with, generally rule of thumb would be to get known, get liked, to get hired, and then negotiate down the line. But I have had people and myself go into situations where I've been very clear up front about what I want, and the hiring managers or the recruiters have said, great, well, I think they'd still be really keen to meet you because you've got great experience. So I think you have to judge it, judge your audience, do your due diligence, work out who you're talking to. If you know that the company is very open to flexibility, then you can start having that conversation a bit earlier on in the process. And sometimes it does avoid a lot of time wasting, where you get all the way down to, you know, you're going for a full-time job, you get all the way down to the final 3, and then right at the end you throw in, oh, forgot to mention, now that you love me, actually I only want 3 days a week, and they're all baffled that you haven't mentioned it before. So I think, you know, it is a game of poker. It is when to show your hand, but I think sometimes it doesn't work to go all the way through a negotiation process, get to the final hurdle, and then tell them that actually you only want to work 20 hours a week. So it's maybe that throws this out slightly, but I think, as everybody said, know your audience, sort of feel your way, and decide when the best time is to show your cards is really good advice.
I think it's also about courage, isn't it? Because arguably there isn't ever a right time, is there? Because you'll just always have that, you know, a lot of people would have that worry in the back of their mind that, you know, this will negatively impact the chances. But I think, you know, you have to feel that fear and do it anyway, don't you? Before we move on to the next question, Karen, I think you'd like to add to this.
I just wanted to touch, say something that Katy touched on there, which is really important, because she referred to a conversation with perhaps a recruiter. And I think when there's a third party involved between yourself and the hiring, the person who's actually going to hire you, that can make it quite I think that's a really important caveat, because you can have a different level of conversation, especially if you're being approached for a role. Maybe you're more senior, you're being headhunted for a role, and you're in a completely different position where you're like 4 days or no days, or whatever it might be, or I'm not coming, I don't want to waste people's time coming for an interview. And I think when you've got that third party, that can really help. The challenge is sometimes that third party won't know as well. They don't know their client as well as they should. So sometimes they will say, oh no, they'll never consider it, which may not actually be true later down the line. So again, it's a bit of a dark art or whatever. But I think, you know, I think it's important that there is that caveat around a third party.
I'd love to come back to that a little bit later on in the conversation, if that's okay. Katy, I'm going to come to you to add build on what Karen's just said there.
Yeah, no, I was going to, you just said you were going to come back to that, but I think it is really important on the recruiter piece, because you can alienate a recruiter straight off the bat by being too honest. So if you go to a recruiter, they can often act as gatekeepers in the process. So if they're going to put a shortlist together and they've got 4 candidates who are all prepared to work full time in the full-time role that's been advertised, and you're asking for 3 days a week and you've been honest with them, then it is highly unlikely they'll put you forward. So you could end up shooting yourself in the foot by being too honest with the recruiter. So again, and you'll touch on this later, it's about how do you feel out your recruiter, and how do you manage that as part of this negotiation.
Well, it's becoming clear there's actually 2 games of poker going on, isn't there? Isn't there really? Michelle.
Yes, and I just wanted to add something around, you know, because we're talking about it being an art more of a science, but I think there is actually, I want to talk a little bit about the science bit, and some of it is around, you know, doing your due diligence about who it is that you are, you know, who it is that you're looking to have a job with. So you can do some research to find out about the company. You know, have they won awards for flexible working? You know, what do they write about on their blogs? Have you read their gender pay gap reports? You know, what are the things that they say that they're going to be doing? What do they pride themselves on? And that can give you a bit of an indication that, yes, as an organization, these are the milestones, these are the targets that we have, these are the things that we're going to be doing. And if flexible working is in there, then you know that on paper, at least, they should be prepared to have these conversations. So I think that can kind of help alongside your intuition as to when you bring that conversation up. If you find that there's no alignment, then obviously that's a question around having an organization that wins all these awards, but then you broach flexible working and it doesn't go well. Obviously that's a conversation for another time, but I do think that it helps with not leaning on your intuition so much if you have some hard evidence to say that as an organization, they pride themselves on flexible working. So this should give you a bit of that courage to be able to bring that conversation up at some stage.
I think the thing for me that's quite exciting that's happening is more organisations are being open about the fact they're not perfect and they're on a journey to do things better, and that they're learning through the experience of COVID that actually this can work. So there's certainly more companies that are talking openly about flexible working and about their desire to do better, whereas what I was finding before is that a lot of companies wouldn't speak about it unless they were confident they had some good news to share. It's kind of more about the path rather than the progress, not perfection, I suppose, isn't it? So for now then, let's get a bit more into the kind of nitty-gritty about the whole ask. So I'd like to talk to you all about language and the kind of language that you would recommend that people use when they start to broach the conversation with either with a recruiter or with an employer. Which would you like to start with? I'd like to come to you, Karen, on this. How should people start the conversation?
Well, I think the main one is to take a solution rather than a problem focused approach. So don't, if you think about it, we all come to work with our own baggage of what's gone on at home and, the awful journey we've had and worrying about our dog and whatever is going on in our lives. So what you don't want really in an interview is to take on somebody else's life that's going to make your life even more complicated. So my advice would be to think more from an employer point of view, and I think candidates don't do that often enough. So what the wrong thing to do in my view would be to sit across the table and say, right, nice job, really interesting, great, we've had a great conversation, I want to do this 3 days, and then sit back, arms folded, and wait for the employer to respond. The same conversation turned around is, I'd like to talk to you now about a flexible working approach that I think could work. And my proposal is that I might do 3 days a week in the office, 1 day a week at home, obviously the pre-COVID conversation or whatever it might be. We want to do a 4-day week. This is how I think we could make it work. I've done it in a previous role. I think these sorts of things would be done in face-to-face contact time, whatever it might be, but you're having a business conversation. What you're not doing is saying, right, I want to work 3 days a week because I've got to collect my daughter from nursery and I've got to put my dog somewhere else. And these are my challenges. What are you going to do? And so I think that starts the whole conversation on the how rather than the why. So I'm really interested in people's lives and why and their lives and what they do and why they do it, but not in this conversation. And I think the reason is irrelevant. The how you're going to do it is the critical thing for this conversation. And, so that's my fundamental, is to have a solution-focused conversation that puts the solutions over to the employer and shows that you've thought about it from a business point of view, not just from your own point of view. And the second thing that I wanted to note on your point about language is that there is no shared understanding of what flexible working is. And I think never has that been more true than now. So if you say to an employer, I want to work flexibly, you may mean I want to do a 4-day week, but they may hear, oh, she wants to work flexibly, so she's going to home work. So really, flexibility is about where you work, when you work, and how much you work. And I think as much as you can be specific about the type of flexibility you're talking about, the more you can do that, the better it is for the whole conversation. And let's not assume that we've got any shared understanding of flexible, because we don't. And even in the businesses that we're talking to, which, all Michelle, Katy and I are all got experience of, businesses think that sometimes if they reinvent the word, we're talking about something different. So we're agile, we're smart, we're intelligent. We're talking about how we work, how much we work, where we work, and when we work. And let's unpack that in terms of the detail.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Karen. Before we move on to the next question, Michelle, Katy, would you like to add anything?
Just reiterate what Karen said. I speak to candidates, and maybe it's because I am pro-flexible, that they feel comfortable in sharing their entire personal life with me, and that's fine. But so many conversations start with, I want to work 3 days a week, I have to pick up my kids from school, I, and the language just needs to change. But more than that, I've spoken to employers who are very open to having that flexible conversation, but get massively put off. And actually, the recruitment, the process is broken by candidates who have negotiation conversations in the wrong way. So I've had many employers who said to me, really like them, I was very open to flexible, but you know, they were demanding this and demanding that, and in the end I felt like I had to pay for their bus to get here, and it just fell apart because of all those reasons. And candidates really need to understand that this is, as Karen said, it's a total two-way process. This isn't about what you want, it's about how can you deliver what the employer wants, and it still fits in with what it is that you need and can work for you too. So it's definitely a two-way thing, and you can massively put off a potential employer by coming in too heavy, too early with all of your needs without factoring in theirs. And I have seen too many times that happening, and a job that was in the bag falling apart because of demands.
Yeah, it's such constructive advice, and it feels like the right time in the conversation now, I think, to move on to the negotiation side of things. So Michelle, I'd love to come to you and to ask you, well, I think my first question, I guess, is what does a successful negotiation look like, and then move on to, you know, how we can, I guess, feel like we're worthy of negotiating and move to a point where we're able to do that.
Yeah, well, I think there's a big myth when it comes to negotiation, and I think a lot of people either view it as a very kind of Donald Trump style of, you know, aggressiveness and, you know, kind of lowest common denominator language towards the other person, or something that's super formal and you have to watch your P's and Q's and you have to be ever so careful and say exactly the right thing all of the time. And one of the things that I talk about when I talk about negotiation coaching with individuals is that negotiations they're simply conversations. They're, you know, it's collaborative conversations. It may take more than one. There'll be some going back and forth, and you're trying to find some common ground. You're trying to find a solution to a problem that you may have. And it's simply a conversation between two adults in trying to figure that out. And it was really interesting what you were saying, Katy, about situations where people are making demands and it's very much I. And that is really off-putting. And the reason being is that the other person is feeling under attack, and they may be thinking, well, yeah, we love you. We've just told you that we want to give you the job, and now you're making demands, and the relationship feels really unequal, uneven. So what I always say to people is, you know, you want the other person to feel that they have some control in this conversation. You want to put them at ease. And part of that is around, you know, using the right language. So instead of saying I want, a simple can we discuss, how about this, you know, those kind of inviting softer questions will put that other person at ease, because it makes them feel that, oh, I'm actually being consulted here, I'm actually part of this conversation, rather than having to listen to a list of demands from somebody. And so that you know, that is, for me, is the real key thing around negotiations. It's about asking smart questions. It's about using much more inclusive language, so that other person feels like not only do they want to be there, but they might be leaning towards being able to give you the thing that you want, or being able to lean towards moving closer to the thing that it is that you want. So asking smart questions, and also listening. You know, when you ask those questions, use the silence, allow people the time to think about what the response might be, and really listen to what they're saying. And it might be that there's pushback and there's resistance. You know, it might be that they come up with all the reasons under the sun why they don't think what you've asked for will work. And so what you do is you mirror. It sounds like you have resistance because of, it sounds like you are worried about X. So if you can mirror that, and then maybe say, how about we try this? Or what if we considered this? Or what do you think would look better? Because the key in flexible working, or conversations about flexible working, is that it's flexible, and that means you have to be flexible too. So yes, you want flexible working. Yes, it might be preferable for you to work 3 days a week, and those specific days are Monday to Wednesday, but that might not work for business. So rather than coming in and saying, well, I want flexible working, this is how it has to look, you have to come in with, well, you know, my preference is to work 3 days a week. I propose X, but I'd like to get your opinion. What do you think would work for business? I propose X because I think this would be best for the business. What are your thoughts? So you're having that back and forth conversation. You're allowing them to have some control, and you will eventually get to a point where you're both happy. But if you do it from a place of demands, it gets people's backs up, and that's the last thing that you want to do, especially when we know that you do need it to be able to pick your kids up from school, but you're not using that as the point, but you're focusing on, okay, how will this work for business, and how can I make it easy for them, or easier for them, to say yes to me? And it's to have that collaborative approach. It's to ask those questions, to allow them to think things through, and to be okay with the fact that they may say no initially, or they may say no down the line. So it really is about asking smart questions, listening to what's being said, as well as listening to what isn't being said, and using that information to keep moving forward, to keep pressing for the thing that is that you want.
That's fantastic advice. I think there's some serious themes emerging here, aren't there, around that sort of solutions focused approach, and a constant collaborative conversation with the employer being absolutely pivotal to this whole process. Karen, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that was really good advice, and I think that mirroring stuff is really interesting, and I would totally go down that road. And I think we've talked about it already earlier in the session about being prepared, to flex on your flex. So if you really love a 3-day week, would you be prepared to do 3.5 or 4? And the other thing that I think is really underused in the negotiation is 2 things. One is the trial period. I think that gives employers a lot of comfort. So you might say, look, I understand this may not be something you've done before in this role. How about we do it for a 3-month trial, and then we review how the flexible working works. So it gives you both the chance, without committing forever, to really see, can we make this work? And I think it's gone my other one, but I think the trial period is one that I do really, really love.
That's a brilliant point. Thanks, Karen. So let's come back to the recruiter and the recruitment piece that we said we'd come back to. What should people look for in a recruiter? And I think, aligning yourself with a recruiter who kind of reflects your values and you feel like is likely to be an advocate for you, and seek out the kinds of opportunities that would be representative of the employers that you'd like to work for. How do you find those recruiters, and what should you look for in a recruiter? Katy, I'd love to come to you first on this.
Sure. So I think that now more than ever, there are so many more recruiters that focus on flexible job opportunities. So a few years ago, you would have struggled. In fact, I think Timewis were the founding fathers of flexible recruiters. So, they set up really the flexible working recruitment piece model. But now there's so many other people doing a similar thing. So do your research. There's, find a recruiter that you is akin to and supportive of flexible working, and that's sort of the first tick in the box of, I know that I'm already working with somebody who talks to companies who are already on board with flexible working, and there are so many of them. So I think that's the first thing. Find all of those recruiters. They're fairly easy to find, and talk to them, and they will understand your needs, and they will represent you in a way that's right for you and your needs. If you find a job, so I say that's first tick in the box, find a recruiter that is pro flexible working. And if it ends up that you are speaking to a recruiter who isn't a flexible working recruiter, and they are advertising a full-time job, and you really are starting from the ground up in terms of this type of conversation, things have changed. So just tracking back to the conversation we've had about COVID, there's not one person, not one recruiter that you would speak to now where you say, I'd quite like to work flexibly. I've been doing this for the past few months successfully. I've been working from home or remotely. Explain how it works, how much more productive you've been, and say, and now that I've experienced this, it would be great to have this in a future role. There's not a recruiter that you would speak to who wouldn't understand and agree that was now an option. And you'll find that most of them will say, look, I'm talking to my clients about flexible working. Some will say that they're absolutely not open to flexible. This is a full-time role and that's it, and they'll shut you down. And you'll find others will be an advocate and they'll say, listen, this is a conversation to be had. So I think, and I said this before, with your recruiter, it's how honest should you be? So I think feel them out if they're not a pro flexible working recruiter. Feel them out, have those early conversations, but don't give your cards away too soon. So when you get on the phone to a recruiter, just like Karen said earlier, the first thing that you should not say is, hi, I'm really interested in this job. I just wanted to know, would they would they allow somebody to do this 3 days a week? So if it's advertised as a full-time job, that's not the best way to get your recruiter on board. It's to talk about the job first in the same way that we've advised with your hiring manager, to sell yourself and your skills, and then to decide at what point with your recruiter do you bring that up. And you can bring it up quite early, just saying, look, are they pro-flexible working? Do you know? But really, as Michelle said earlier, you should have done your research as well into the type of company that you're applying for, and have a bit of an understanding before you get on with the recruiter and sort of make demands as to what you want. So again, with your recruiter is a bit of a poker game. You can go to a recruiter who's very pro-flexible working, and you don't even have to do all this dancing around, which most of us have to do all the time. Or you can go to a recruiter who's not, and just feel your way a bit with them, try and get them on side. But as I said earlier, you can shut them down far too quickly if you go in with your demands too early, because they'll end up putting forward candidates who tick all the boxes, because that's just easier.
Yeah.
That was a very long-winded answer.
No, it's brilliant. Thanks so much for the detail. I appreciate your thorough answers so much. Michelle, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, so I was just thinking as Katie was talking, and I was thinking, actually, if you have to talk to your recruiter about the possibility of flexible working because it's not really obvious, this is actually a good way of practicing those negotiation skills, because if you learn about it, you'll be talking to the employer about it. But I think she's right about sounding people out and doing your due diligence and, kind of doing your research. And I guess part of this is around normalizing the conversation around flexible working for them. So if they don't know that much about their organizations, that their clients, then this is a bit of a wake-up call for them to go and do that research, so that when people come to them, they seem credible and they know what they're talking about and they can answer that question confidently. So I agree with what Katie was saying about doing your due diligence. And one of the ways in which you could do it is after you kind of sold yourself and the skills that you have, you could just start to ask questions about the company's culture. Is there anything about this organization that you can tell me that isn't out there in the public domain, such as flexible working, internal career progression policies they have. You can do your detective work, and you can weave that in if it's not completely obvious from the start that this organization champions flexible working and that this role in particular is open to flexible working as well. But it really is about doing that research, asking around, and trying to glean as much information as you can, but approaching it from a place of curiosity rather than, well, I've got these demands and this is what I'm going to ask for once I have the answers.
Brilliant advice there. Thank you so much, Michelle. Karen.
I hope I'm not going to get in trouble for saying this, but unfortunately, the recruitment industry have been very late to the flexible working party. And, as Katie said, that's why we were starting this conversation many years ago. And the reality is, and the jobs index shows us this, is that the way people work has changed, but the way people are hired has not. And it really has, and the recruitment industry has been generally one of the key barriers to this. So it's great that things are changing. I'm really impatient for that change, because I feel like we've been talking about it for a really long time. Yeah. The thing that people don't realise as well is when people are applying for a part-time role, if you're going through a recruiter, part-time, if their payment is based on a percentage of the first year's salary, which it often is, then they are actually financially disincentivized from putting part-time candidates forward. And I think that's something that people forget. So you really need to be very, very clear. And that in a way goes back to our previous discussion. In that situation, if you think that might be happening, that is a reason to hold on and wait till later, because you don't want to be put on the maybe pile, because actually there's going to be less of a fee there. So I think that all the evidence is showing us that for candidates, the flexibility in how they do their job is often as important as the salary they will get for doing it. But that is just not reflected properly now in the recruitment process. And I think it's on all of us, those working in the sector, those who are candidates in it, and those who are employed at senior levels in our organisations, to get this conversation much more transparent and much more out in the open, and to stop that kind of blocking. Sorry, that's my soapbox bit.
I was just thinking, Karen, I'm so glad you've mentioned that, because I feel like that's the perfect note to end on. Actually, it's on all of us, and I feel really strongly that, you know, with the entire, you know, content that we've got today for the entire event of Flexpo, you know, an undertone of it is we are all in this together, and this is about, you know, helping you to secure a role that works for you and makes your life work with your career. It's also about encouraging more people to become more vocal about the need for change, and there has never to me been a better moment than now to become part of that. So thank you all so much for your wisdom and insight and expertise, because I think this particular session is going to give so much practical advice for people in our audience. So I can't thank you enough. I know there are plenty of helpful resources to support what you've said and the advice that you've all given today on the Timewis website, the Equality Pays website, and on Flexible Working People. So again, thank you all so much, and what a conversation. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.